From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative policy and priorities and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and our guest this time around is State Senator Fran Pavley, representing the 27th Senate District from Ventura County, Simi Valley, eastern San Fernando Valley, all the way down to the shores of Malibu Beach. So you encompass mountains and seas. You are also the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee, which is also the only the icing on the cake here so far of this, a really distinguished legislative career with environmental policy, some of which we'll talk about here, policy that's resonated across the country, and also a school teacher too. So there's a lot of things we can talk about, a nexus with environmental policy and school teaching as well. Welcome, Senator. Glad to have you here
much.
On Senate Spotlight. You have indeed created more than just a distinguished career. You've created a legacy here with your legislation, and most recently, if you will, of the last decade or so, AB 32 and 1493, dealing with the greenhouse gas emissions. Even the president, when he was setting up national mileage standards, gave you a shout out when he did this. Tell us about this. What's it like to see your work take on a life of its own like this?
Well, we built quite a coalition in California back in 2001 and 2002, and the Clean Car Law, that's AB 1493, was unique. It was the first standard for greenhouse gas emissions, and we focused on automobiles because the major contributor of greenhouse gases in California is automobiles,
right.
26 million of them.
Right.
And we needed a waiver from the Environmental Protection Agency to implement more stringent air pollution standards. Took a lot of court cases, Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Other states copied our regulations. I worked in other states. And I had a Cinderella moment in my life. I was invited to a Rose Garden White House ceremony,
right,
where it was a who's who. I'm in the front row with Nancy Pelosi and everyone else up there, and the President of the United States, surrounded by all the major automobile manufacturers, foreign and domestic, announced that the new federal standards would be based on California's clean car regulations. And as a former history teacher who taught how a bill becomes law, that was one of my favorite moments.
No,
of my
that's
career.
absolutely. Well, that's sweet justice, Cinderella. I mean, you had to drag California and even the country kind of kicking and screaming into some of this. But what's been the impact, environmentally and otherwise, here in the state and nationally with this? How has it fit?
Well, we've seen what was considered just an environmental bill become really an important economic engine. We've seen now the diversification of the kinds of vehicles that people have a choice to drive. We've seen a resurgence of the American automobile manufacturers here in our country. In fact, GM is #1 in the world again. And consumers now have a broader choice of vehicles. And with $4 a gallon gasoline that we've seen just recently, they're saving money at the pump. We're reducing dependence on foreign oil. And yes, we're also cleaning up our air and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so now there's a federal standard that will greatly increase fuel efficiency, where you will be getting up to 40 to 50 miles per gallon in the next 20 years.
I know that it's difficult sometimes, especially with term limits, for you and your colleagues to even sometimes make an impact on the margins of California policy, but you've gone beyond that with this legislation.
Right place at the right time in an amazing coalition. Healthcare people concerned and relating the link between greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. We had water agencies concerned about snowpack, Hollywood personalities, always a help here in California, right? And timing is everything. We lucked out with a 5-4 decision by the United States Supreme Court on whether the Environmental Protection Agency was allowed to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Federal Clean Air Act. We won that one, and so you'll see the federal government slowly moving in that direction.
Just fast forward to 2012, 2013, there's already been a lot accomplished environmentally here in California just in the last year. The solar power initiatives, the underwater parks, the marine sanctuaries, renewable energy source goals that are met, and even the carbon buyback program, the credit compliance program that the state's doing. Tell us about that and some of these other successes just in the last year.
Well, one of the advantages of passing some of these legislation, and let's go with AB 32, which now has established a market for investment of clean technology in California. You mentioned renewables. We require now in California that 33% of all our energy mix has to come from clean renewable sources. What is the advantage of setting that cap and requirement and regulatory formula? You're seeing heavily invested in California because we've created a market for those. We're creating also homegrown jobs right here.
That's the
in
key
solar
right there.
and
Yes.
wind. And there are literally hundreds of new California businesses engaged in energy efficiency or in solar and wind production. And these are industries that can't be gamed by out-of-state energy companies like Enron.
Right.
I went through the energy deregulation
Right.
crisis.
I remember that well.
Or by foreign governments, over-reliance on the Middle East or other countries for our energy needs is going in the wrong direction. And so we're seeing economic benefits as well as environmental benefits, and that's what I'm trying to do, is establish that win-win.
And that is really the key, that showing that environmental sustainability and jobs are not mutually exclusive here.
Absolutely.
And helping the economy of the state. And when you have that proof, in addition to what it does to the environment, that sort of brings more people to the table.
And we've had a new interesting mix here. We have combined forces. I carried a bill last year with the Department of Defense. Who knew that the Department of Defense, that would be the military, primarily the Navy and the Marines right here in California, and we have bases, would link with the state of California and our Office in Planning and Research and with the private sector clean tech companies to all work collaboratively together on these same goals.
That's great. Well, let's look though realistically. The California environment, nation's environment, still 1,000 plates spinning here. We're still kind of on a precipice, depending on what you read every day. With the climate change, there's still debate about that. What do you say to those folks, with global warming? What do you mean global warming? It's 27 degrees outside. So you still have skeptics on that issue and many others, and still a lot of work to do. What do you say to that?
Well, I think most people have realized there is climate change. There is what they call wacky weather, more extreme weather events, temperatures that are higher than normal over long periods of time. Temperatures can be colder than normal, hurricanes and different kinds of conditions that are more extreme than we've ever envisioned before. We've seen, for example, this year in Australia, averages of 120 degrees and the implications that brings on agriculture and your economy. So there might be a few people debating still that whether it's human caused or not, but I think everyone agrees, even the skeptics, that the climate is changing, and how are we going to adapt, and can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that they don't accelerate as quickly as
Are
they
we
could.
beyond a point where we can reverse course, or we just have to maintain and not let it get
We
any
have
worse?
to do two things. We have to do both. We have to, and it's going to cost a lot of money. We're looking at replacing our levees because we're concerned about sea level rise and saltwater intrusion into the delta. We're concerned about snowpack and water supply and delivery. We're going to have to do both, and there's a potential in California for investment in these new clean technologies that will allow us to maintain a quality of life that we're used to, but reduce our energy consumption at the same time, and that's why you see the explosion of business growth in places like Silicon Valley.
Let's talk about another technology, which is not a new technology, it's a pretty old one, but California is next in line with it, and it's creating a lot of controversy across the country, and that's the hydraulic fracturing, known as fracking. It's a controversial drilling process. We're sitting on some pretty valuable oil land here in this state, oil shale, but there's still a lot of controversy on its effect on the environment versus whatever economic help it could give. Tell us what your perspective is on that.
Well, my perspective right now is to try to work with the administration to make sure we have regulations in place that will protect the health and safety of Californians. Some people would like to ban fracking, but is there a way to allow it, providing that we have those protections in place? For example, as chair of the Water Committee, I am very concerned that one of the unintended consequences of hydraulic fracturing would be contamination of our water supply. Groundwater basins are very susceptible to any kind of chemicals. Fracturing is the use of millions of gallons of water laced with chemicals to enhance oil recovery and natural gas. It is being used here in California. I've met with enough people to know it'll be expanding in California. we don't have adequate regulations in place, and I will be carrying a bill.
That's SB4, right?
Yes, trying to put those in place, but you walk a fine line here. You've got to make sure we do this right, and the public is skeptical on this issue, and they should be, and we've got to make sure that they feel that we have agencies like our Regional Water Board establishing baselines and carefully monitoring our water supply and groundwater basins to protect agriculture as well as urban water users.
Well, California has already introduced these regulations, came out at the end of the year, and of course your bill, as you say, addresses directing the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, say that fast 3 times, to implement this. But some people are saying this just has absolutely no teeth. It's really not a mandate. It's just almost voluntary compliance by the industry, and there's no communication between the industry and landowners. What do you say to that?
I say that when these draft regulations go through the process, and I'll be having hearings on them, we want to make sure there's enforcement authority, that there is teeth to it. I want to make sure the Regional Water Board has a way to coordinate, so we're not operating in separate silos, but coordinate with the Department of Conservation, that's DOGGR, that we can protect the public in this. So there are several agencies in effect. What enforcement authority does DOGGR have? What do we do with the lists of chemicals that they're using it? How do we protect some of the interests of the oil and gas companies that are using these chemicals? How much water is being taken out of groundwater basins? I'm concerned about overdraft. And several counties in California now are looking at regulating or permitting the practice of hydraulic fracturing. I have told the oil companies directly to their face, if the public doesn't feel that the regulations are adequate, there is going to be a tremendous outcry by the public. So we've got to get these right, and our agencies have to be up to the task of enforcing and protecting the public. That's what we do here.
But you still have a lot of those folks here in California who look at our dependence on foreign oil still, and we have billions of gallons of mother lode down there. God, I sound like the guy from the movie Giant, but millions of gallons of mother lode. So there is that resource down there.
There is that resource, and that's sort of one of the trade-offs here. 26 million cars plus trucks and everything else that require use of oil. I'm working very hard to reduce how much oil we do use, because it's a fossil fuel that causes greenhouse gas emissions, but also a realist in that we need to figure out a way to safely transition from use of foreign oil and then use of oil in general, all fossil fuels, or coal. California has a law that prohibits us buying and purchasing any more coal, so we don't incentivize that and bringing it in from out of state. So as the years go by, the ideal scenario would be to reduce how much oil we're using. I support alternative fuels, cleaner alternative fuels. We have a measure in place called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard that's pushing the oil companies to come up with a cleaner fuel blend that accomplishes those objectives. But our economy does rely on some use of fuels, and right now oil's a large percentage of it. It should get less over time.
You have also taken your environmental advocacy and legacy and made this nexus with your passion for teaching in schools and promoting clean energy in California, and was it AB 35 and AB 39, the Higher Ed Energy Solutions Act, and then the other bill that you're co-authoring with the Senate Pro Tem and others, dealing with streamlining and changing energy efficiency in California's public schools. Tell us about both those bills.
Well, Proposition 39 passed in November, courtesy of the voters. It'll take a large sum of money, half of which about $500 million a year, that can be reinvested in energy efficiency in public buildings, including schools. The idea is if you invest in energy efficiency, you can reduce your utility bills, shifting money, obviously, back into the classroom, which is our highest priority, as well as cleaning up the environment and cleaning up our air, and creating those jobs. right now, amazing amount of jobs have been created and people being trained, whether it's solar installation or energy efficiency measures. So there is a bill by Senator Kevin De Leon, and I'm a joint author, I believe, with Darrell Steinberg on that, to look at how that money is expended. The proposal right now is mostly in K-12 education, could be expanded, and I'm open to this, to the university and colleges. They need to become more energy efficient. Also, it could go into other public buildings like libraries or hospitals.
Great. You have done so much with the environment, but you also look at the human beings here in California, particularly the developmentally disabled. And in just a couple of moments here that we had left, I know last year you were very effective in some of your legislation, particularly even taking the phrase mentally retarded off the books here in California, and also trying to protect the victims of sexual assault who are developmentally disabled here in California. Sounds like two different things, but they're both key in giving people a voice who don't already have one. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's one of my passions, and thank you for that question. But I'm introducing a bill this year because of a situation that's unacceptable that's occurring in some of our state hospitals. Since 2005, there have been 36 charges of sexual abuse and rape occurring in our state hospitals without really the adequate forensic or rape kits being required that you would do in the general population. I have a bill that will do just that, because that is unacceptable. Imagine having particularly a daughter or a son, that is, having to spend the majority of their life in a state institution and being subjected to that kind of horror. So I'll be working on that. I'm very involved with making sure adequate services are going to regional centers and people that are developmentally disabled. I have a son who is autistic. That's a growing epidemic here in California, with 1 out of every 90 children diagnosed with autism. It's an important issue, and it's very relevant to what we do as a state.
Environment, we're advocating for the developmentally disabled, two separate issues, but it combines ultimately people and their health and their safety and their viability. Are attitudes changing in both areas in terms of protecting our environment and in terms of taking care of each other, particularly those who can't take care of themselves?
I think why Californians are such strong advocates of protecting the environment, we're not just protecting, let's say, our forests and our oceans, but we're doing a lot with environmental health, reducing air pollution and protecting our water quality has impacts on our most vulnerable populations, and that's our youth as well as our elderly. And climate change fits into that discussion too, as we're faced with warmer temperatures over periods of time. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize your air quality is worse. Health impacts for extreme heat episodes, how is that impacting things? They all work very well together, and so investing in our schools, investing in public health, protecting our environment, all is very critically important to Californians, and I'm glad to be in Sacramento working on those issues.
We're glad to have you here. Senator Pavley,
you.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope to
welcome.
have you back to talk maybe more into the weeds, if you will, on some of these issues as they mature and grow here this year.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Senator Fran Pavley, representing the 27th Senate District down in the San Fernando Valley, Simi Valley, the coast of Malibu. She's got it all there. That wraps up this edition of Senate Spotlight. We invite you to join us next week as we discuss important legislative issues and policies with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.